So hello and thank you so much for coming today. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I also want to thank very quickly. I want to thank Robin for putting all of this together, Gitta for curating, and Susan for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you very much. This is actually my first visit ever to Carmel, which is kind of cool because my parents actually honeymooned here, like back in the dark ages, whenever it was that they honeymooned. No, I think it was 1970, and they always. I'm joking. I was born in '73, so it's not that long ago, or at least I'm going to say that. But they always spoke so fondly and whimsically of Carmel, and I think it has held this sort of mystique for me over the years. And the running joke in our family is that the fond memories of the honeymoon far outlived the marriage. So it's been fun to come here, and I'll actually get to see it more in the next couple of days. So the work that you are seeing at CPA today is called Natural History, and as was said, it basically, in essence, is a collection of images featuring reflections of people viewing wildlife dioramas in museums. And while this work is intensely personal for me, it's also kind of foreign in some ways. It's about transformation. It's about transforming the ordinary into the sublime, and about transforming vague childhood memories into adult allegories, and also about the more mercurial side of image making, which is definitely what has always appealed to me about photography, and what I fell in love with at a very young age about this medium. And for me, every image in this series is really like solving a mystery that I never knew existed. When I see them come to life, it's absolutely amazing. So I'll show you a couple here. Unlike so much of my work, this series is completely unscripted, completely feral, completely impossible to control, which is both frustrating and liberating at the same time. All I can do is really be in the right place at the right time, and hope to, push the button. I like to call it my own modern alchemy, using antique taxidermy and the modern public. As mentioned before, the images are all completely candid, in camera, single exposure. They're not made in Photoshop. The people do not know they're being photographed. I do not inform them that they have been photographed. And I just sort of light the stage, and the players do as they will. So in my artist statement, I talk a lot about the root of this series, which kind of all started here. It's based in my childhood experiences in a very small natural history museum in Raleigh, North Carolina, this one, where my mother served as a volunteer curator for several years. And it was during a time of upheaval and change in our family, and so I was, by necessity, I sort of tagged along with her after school and during the summer, and I spent an enormous amount of time in this museum kind of trying to kill time. And that's what it looked like then. These photos are obviously older than from the 70s, but it still looked like this when I was there. Now it's this massive world-class natural sciences museum, but then it was really very small and quiet and musty, and I was at a time where I think I was turning very much inward, and the museum kind of provided a stage, I guess, for my imagination. And they had this wonderful periodical room that was just like floor-to-ceiling magazines, and they had every single issue of National Geographic ever printed, going back to 1888 from the first issue. And I spent so much time in that room just holding these magazines and looking at them, and was really kind of fascinated with the idea that I was looking at photos of people that had been dead for so long. And I think I developed then a real love of Victorian photography, which has inspired a lot of my work. And I also spent a great deal of time looking at the dioramas. These are some of the more rudimentary, the simpler ones that they had there. They did have some bigger, more elaborate ones, but it was a small, underfunded museum, and all of the dioramas kind of focused on indigenous North Carolina wildlife, pelicans and woodland creatures, and I spent hours and hours just staring at them, which I think even as a child I felt what I do now when I look at taxidermied animals and when I look at these displays, which is sort of an uneasy sense of ambivalence. I think it's incongruent to see such beauty, that of the animals, that of the painting that went into the diorama, kind of juxtaposed against this unnatural sort of stillness, and obviously the knowledge that these animals were hunted and killed specifically for these displays, in many cases, sometimes not. And as also was mentioned earlier, in many, many, many dioramas, the animals featured are now severely endangered or completely extinct, largely due to overhunting and habitat loss. So that makes them, I think, all the more poignant. So flash forward 25 years. This is actually the Hall of African Mammals in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. My husband took me to Manhattan for the weekend. We live in Providence, so it's not that far, and sort of a birthday treat. And the two things that I wanted to do that weekend were to stay at the Chelsea Hotel, where Leonard Cohen used to live. I'm a big Leonard Cohen fan. And to go to the American Museum of Natural History and see their really famous dioramas. And the Chelsea Hotel was a big disappointment. It was really stinky and musty and not really a good experience. But the museum was amazing, even more than I could have even ever imagined. And fortunately, while I was there, I decided to just take some snapshots of these very famous dioramas, which is kind of rare for me because I'm not a snapshotter. I'm one of those photographers that has absolutely no documentation of their own lives whatsoever. But fortunately, I did. And what happened was my husband showed up in the picture. And I was immediately intrigued by this. And so I took another one. And there he was. And I think I'm in there too with a bunch of other people. And so I ended up spending the rest of the day actually trying to follow people around and get their reflections to show up in these pictures. And this is the first one I took that was not him, that was people I didn't know. And when I got home and looked at it, I was really intrigued. And so I started then to make regular trips to this particular museum to sort of explore this series further. And I'll show you a couple of early images that aren't really in the series now for a number of reasons. Mainly they're kind of technical nightmares, but I still really like them. I'm very fond of them. And this was kind of how it began, and it started to progress. And, as I shot these more and more, I got better at it, and I got better at the technical aspects. And I also got better at knowing what I was looking for. And they began to become more complex, and the narratives within them became more intricate. And I became, more and more satisfied with these and realized that this was something I really did want to pursue seriously. And then when I got this image, which is in the show, I was very happy because I realized that this was the direction I wanted it to go in. I wanted these multiple narratives. I wanted these really incredible chance things that happened in this photograph to happen in all of them. So people often ask me about the process of actually shooting these and what it's like. And honestly, it's really kind of tedious. It's hot, it's crowded. I'm standing there with a camera for hours and hours and hours trying to kind of look inconspicuous, which I don't. And it's shot with a Nikon DSLR and a flash gun and some sort of bounce card usually, because without that, the reflections are not lit. And they don't, they're very vague in the picture. They don't show up as strongly as I want them to. Basically, I stand in front of the dioramas with my camera and I pretend like I'm very fixated on some point right in the middle of them. But really, I'm looking for people to walk up out of the side of my eye here. And I see them come up to the glass. And as soon as I see their reflection show up in the glass, I start shooting. And usually they like cover their eyes and they get annoyed, or the worst is they say, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I was in your shot," and then they walk away, and I'm like, "No, come back, but I don't say that, of course, because it's all very secretive. So then I follow them. They move on to the next diorama, and I keep shooting, and they get annoyed and go to the next one, and I follow them and keep shooting, and I basically do this until they really kind of snarl at me, or one of the staff kind of pauses and looks at me a little too long, or until I happen to get a good shot. And it's really kind of a voyeuristic and underhanded enterprise, but I tell myself that a little deception creates very honest images in this particular case. I personally view this work as a collection of little allegorical vignettes, kind of little fables about our troubled history with nature, our fear, our greed, dominion, and also our awe and our respect of it as well, which seems to go hand in hand. These are a tribute to my own past. They're a tribute to the animals that are in these exhibits forever. They're also a tribute to the incredibly talented people that made these dioramas, and this has become really kind of a lost art. These beautiful things were created so that people could feel completely immersed in a nature that they would never probably see in their lifetime. And the artists and artisans that made these really were exceptional. I have some wonderful photos of some of these very famous dioramas being made. Now, most of these were actually made in the late Victorian period, kind of into the 40s and 50s. You can see this woman is actually in Victorian dress, which is really cool. I love this photo. This is so great. And see, I mean, in a sense, these are almost inadvertently doing what I was doing, except these are the people actually making the dioramas. This is one of the ones that's in my series. So I actually also have a couple of before and afters. These are images of dioramas that are featured in my series actually as they were being made. So here is Bald Eagle as it was being made, and there's my Bald Eagle. I want to call it mine. Here is Sable Antelope as it was being constructed, and there's my Sable Antelope years later. And her shirt actually is one of the only things that I usually try to take out. The only alterations that I do to these photos generally is when there's something that really pinpoints a particular element of pop culture or period in time, a band or a brand or something like that. And I decided to leave this because it didn't really bother me since it was backwards, but usually I would take that out. Those are the only pixels that are ever moved in these pictures. Here's the very iconic bear. And there's my bear with a whole class of students. And fortunately, a lot of the really famous dioramas get periodic facelifts. And, every 10 or 15 or 20 years, they get vacuumed, or they get a new coat of paint, or they get a little stitching to put them back together. And, fortunately, a number of museums in this country have held on to theirs, but there are also a great number of them that over the past 25 years have discarded their dioramas. They have been criticized as being dull and outmoded and relics, basically, of the Victorian period, things that kids are no longer interested in. And I have to tell you, from experience, I love this shot just because this was kind of new to them then. And I think this is how a lot of people who ran museums looked at these dioramas for a while, that they really were antiquities that no one was interested in. But that is so not the case. I've spent probably more hours in these halls than anyone except the staff. And what I do when I'm there trying to photograph is I listen. And I hear the comments that children make and what everybody says when they come in. And I can tell you that kids are absolutely awestruck by these things, despite having YouTube and Animal Planet and all of the things that these people who the dioramas were made for did not have. There's something about walking into a room and seeing a life-size animal up a little higher than you, posed, in flight or fight, or these kids are blown away. And honestly, this kind of represents the reactions that I see from them more often than not. A lot of times they're just yelling. They're so excited. They're jumping up and down. And I don't even see kids that excited at the zoo. There's something about these tableaus that really speaks to them, and on a really primal level. And it's incredible to watch. So this series is also about memorializing this art form, the art form of the diorama, and I hope to expand it to include more and more that have been preserved around the country. And as Gitta mentioned in her statement, actually, I also like to think that this is very much in the spirit of the decisive moment, that split second of lucid inspiration. But natural history actually takes that one step further, in that I don't even know when that moment is. It's revealed to me later when I open the files and see what sort of magic I happened to capture. So I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you.